Good evening, everyone in YouTube land. Welcome to another episode of Follow Me. Brother Tyler, leave the door open so others may join us in our discussion tonight. Tonight, we're going to be famous.
Yeah? You think so?
We're going to try.
Infamous, maybe. Famous, no.
Well, inflammable means it's flammable with oxygen, so if we're infamous, then I guess we could be famous in oxygen.
True. True statement.
So, welcome to everyone. We're your hosts, Worshipful Brother Wiley Forrester, and I'm Worshipful Brother Will Moore. Tonight's episode is brought to you by...
Cinco de Mayo.
Absolutely.
Why we celebrate the Spanish holiday, I do not know, but thankful for our Spanish brethren. Maybe one day we can fill it again with margaritas and queso dip.
And also, I have to give a special shout out tonight. My wife, who puts up with me for one, but number two, it's her birthday today. I will not say her age, but she has been kind enough to let me come out and do the show again tonight. I think it's her birthday present. She wanted me to be away. Maybe.
And so we are wearing our 2017 Georgia Masonic Leadership Conference shirts. It was not a coordinated effort. It just sort of happened that way.
It's scary.
It's bad, scary, the way these brains are working these days. So tonight we're going to talk about a few famous Masons and a few things that some of them did. Mm-hmm. We know that throughout history there have been hundreds and hundreds of Masons who have done fantastic things, but these were written, and you can find them at you can find them on Wikipedia at any time, and go and search what they've done. But you can also find them in universalfreemasonry.org and go to several Grand Lodges. They have a lot of different famous Masons in their list too, and they sort of match up well based on the travels that I've had, and the being fortunate enough to travel to the Grand Lodge of New York and see where Harry Houdini went to lodge, and W.C. Fields and some of these other guys went to lodge there in New York City. So it got us to thinking, why don't we do something on famous Masons just to give somebody a little bit of history.
History. I mean, we're giving them some history from some of the people that have been Masons, some of the men.
Right.
And also we're going to tell you about some Masons currently who are famous. Just to show the difference in the walks of life. We have, everyone can be a Mason. Well, let me rephrase that. Not everyone can be a Mason, but there are famous folks who are Masons who someone thought enough of to bring into Masonry.
Absolutely.
So,
I wholeheartedly agree. And tonight we're going to start with most worshipful Brother Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin, he was initiated in 1730. But before he could get into the lodge, he started his own society. Because they wouldn't let him in to start with.
Why not?
Well, he was a little sketchy there at times, but according to the history, but
as sketchy as you?
No, he didn't get that close,
okay.
But I'm sure he did. But they want to start his own society called the Leathern Apron Society.
The Leathern
Apron Society.
Not the Brethren.
But he was initiated in 1730, finally. And, of course, he went on to become Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. There's a huge statue of him that is in the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Of course, it also is across the street from City Hall there in Philadelphia, and William Penn is up on the top of the City Hall over there. But a cool thing about Benjamin Franklin is that if he'd have had his way, instead of the eagle being the national bird, it'd been the turkey.
Okay.
Seriously. That's no joke. It would have been the turkey.
There's so many jokes there.
Yes, absolutely. But it's a factual statement.
Okay.
The turkeys were a symbolic bird back then. Why? I don't know. Or the pelican. He wanted the pelican on our money.
Okay, so I see he was a strange bird.
Yeah, it was a strange bird, 100%.
No pun intended.
Yes.
Or maybe.
So, who's our next guy on our list?
Next person, of course, is the father of our country, George Washington.
Yes.
He was initiated November 4th, 1752.
Boy, he lived a long time.
He
If
was
you
an
don't
old
let
man.
1954, there is no doubt.
1752. So I know that Worship Brother Forrester beside me, I'm trying to learn my lesson from last week's episode, probably knows a lot more about Washington than I do. So if you have some fun points about Washington.
I know that the Holy Bible that Washington took his obligation on is kept there in New York City. It's actually kept in Federal Hall.
Oh.
But it's in possession of the lodge there in New York. And there's another copy that is in Alexandria down at the George Washington Masonic Memorial.
Didn't you get to...
I've actually got to see it, touch it, feel it, look at it, cry over it, thinking, oh my God, I don't want to drop this thing. But I will tell you, I do have a replica of it here in my library here at home. The coolest part about George Washington is that he was so well respected. I mean, he was a well respected human being. He is also the father of our country, and he never served as Grand Master.
That's surprising in a little ways, but he was a busy man,
and he was very dedicated to the cause. Yeah. He was dedicated to bringing good morals and good principles to this country.
Well, we've talked about a couple of leaders of our country, and that shows that we've had leaders in Masonry. Now let's move to a different section of our population. Let's move into music. So who's our next one tonight?
That would be Mozart. Mozart. Also, Bach was also a Mason. There were several other very well-known composers at that time that were also Masons. And in the 1700s, in that time frame, Freemasons were, there was a huge Protestant revolution back then, going on. And there were a lot of separation between church and state, and a lot of things that were going against a lot of things at that time. So these guys were looking for enlightenment. Think about that. Here we are in 2020. We're talking 300 years ago, and we're still looking for enlightenment.
Yeah.
Think about that. That's cool. But Mozart was initiated on December 14 in 1784.
Well, that's only 30 years after Washington.
Correct.
That's kind of neat. They're in that same time frame.
Yeah, and if you look, there were some very huge players in history of the world as far as music. The arts, the liberal arts. All of those things were just big at that time.
Well, during when Mozart was a Mason, he actually created a huge number of musical numbers during his political career. During the time he was a Mason, and he was part of and I'm going to mess this name up.
Just call it Charity Lodge.
Charity Lodge in Austria, but it's It's a German name, Wohltätigkeit. Something.
That didn't sound correct.
No, it didn't.
You murdered it. You got it.
They called it Charity Lodge out of Austria. So
and then there were so many leaders from around the world that were also pretty famous, and the way that I classified famous, I always try to look for what did they do in history of the world.
Right.
During that time period, if I'm thinking someone is famous, we have guys in our fraternity now that are famous as far as I'm concerned, but will they? I mean, I think they could change the world, but overall, would I think they're going to end up in a Wikipedia search? Probably not. But
no. But our next one did.
But the next one did, and he is of Venezuelan descent. And what he did, the most important thing that he did was he led several countries in their succession from Spain during that time.
Right.
And his name was
Simon Bolivier. He led Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Panama to their independence
from Spanish control.
Yep.
And this happens, I would say, 1800s.
1800, somewhere in that neighborhood. He was initiated back in 1803, so it had to be somewhere in that neighborhood he did it. We could look up the actual dates, but he was a member of a lodge out of Cadiz, Spain, which was also home to many Southern American founding fathers. In April 1824, Simon was given the 33rd degree of Inspector General Honorary.
So he was Scottish Rite Mason.
He was.
So that had a lot to do with a lot of cool things. And, Inspector General Honorary is a huge accomplishment for any Scottish Rite Mason, for those who may not know. It's the highest honorary award you can get next to the Grand Cross. And one of our own is in possession of that Grand Cross now. And he's also on our cast tonight. But the 33rd degree honorary Inspector General, or Inspector General Honorary, is a huge honor to have that bestowed upon you. Just like all Masonic accolades, if you're fortunate enough to attain those things, are shouldn't ever be taken lightly, is what I want to say there. Because if you look back over history and you see who has been recipients of certain things, especially here in Georgia, and then you look at yourself and you think, God, how'd I get worthy to get something like that, So, I don't take Masonic accomplishments and things that are bestowed upon me very lightly. Right. Those are things that I don't ever feel worthy of, because I just do what I do. I don't care for all that stuff. I mean, it's nice. It's nice to go through it and to receive it. But at the end of the day, we talk about it in our earlier episodes that brother's still the number one title.
Absolutely.
And but when these guys obtain, and we read through history, and they're saying, oh, this guy was this and this guy, that dude was pretty active, according to history. And of course, then we had Samuel Clemens, who was Mr. Twain.
Yep.
But his Masonic history kind of funny. If you read up a little bit more on his history, some say he was, some say he wasn't. Just like Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, the great American. When I traveled up to Elizabethtown, New Jersey or into Pennsylvania for their leadership conference, they have a little atrium out in over at their Masonic village, and there are so many of Thomas Paine's quotes that are situated in this. So that Thomas Paine had a Masonic influence somewhere, But Mark Twain, he was initiated in May 22nd of 1861. So, it was a pretty tough time in America then, about time for, Civil War to start. He belonged to Polar Star number 79 in St. Louis. But that's his history's kind of, it's kind of stretched out. It's really not up there. And then, of course, you got your British Prime Minister in Winston Churchill.
I'm not going to do my English accent. It's awful.
He was initiated in 1901 in Stoneholm in 1591 in England.
But in 1912, he resigned from Masonry.
Well, that's because he went in his political career and he didn't want to affect it, but he was still a very staunch supporter.
He was. He was a super supporter even after that. Still contributed to Freemasonry. But he was one of the few that I found from history that resigned publicly from Freemasonry because he didn't want it to have any sway on his political career.
Correct. And he felt like the good of England was better for it. That way he could be unbiased.
Right.
And then, we move a little bit later in history. We got J. Edgar Hoover. He was the creator of the FBI. He was coronated 33rd degree Inspector General Honorary as well. But he was also, if any of you have ever been to the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C., there's a room that is dedicated to him. He also received the Grand Cross in the Scottish Rite. Now,
I'm not Scottish Rite, so I don't yet know what those
But you will.
are.
But you will know. But anyway, Hoover was an eccentric human being as well. He was sometimes he is far out there. There's been some questionable things that you look back on history and look into things that he did. Some things make you question. He probably didn't deserve to be some.
Well, and in this day and age, we probably would have passed on him.
Yes, absolutely.
And speaking of passes,
Yeah.
you know who was next?
Who
that brings to mind? Elway,
John Elway,
quarterback.
Hall of Fame quarterback
Absolutely.
of the Denver Broncos.
And he was initiated in 2002.
And he belongs to South Denver Lodge there in Denver. He's still very active, but as now he's the general manager of the Denver Broncos, and he is still participates in his lodge activities, still contributes. He's also a perpetual member.
Well, for those that don't know, what is a perpetual member?
A perpetual member is where you pay all of your dues and fees up front, and you don't ever have to make another dues payment. You're a life member at that point.
Of that lodge.
Of that particular lodge. So he is that guy. And then my favorite
this is
my favorite person looking over.
Hold on. He's been talking about this guy all evening because I got over here a couple hours ago, and he will not shut up about this guy.
This guy is so fascinating, and I really didn't realize how fascinating was. I've read a lot of his books. I have looked at some of his plays. He did a lot of things in satire, and it's Voltaire. Voltaire was a Frenchman who was really a huge proponent of freedom of speech,
separation of church and state.
Separation of church and state. And
I've heard some of this.
I mean, the guy was so impressive, but he also, it was just about enlightenment as a whole. The ability to free think was impressive to him, and he wrote this book called Candide, which is my absolute favorite book. And it's one of those satire novels that it's really deep. It was written in the 1740s or 50s, and it's got all that funky, the way the language is written and things of that nature. But overall, he was a cool cat, and but he didn't get initiated into Freemasonry until late 1700s.
But he was old too, wasn't
he? Yeah, he was 80 years old when he was initiated into lodge, and Ben Franklin was his escort.
No, that's cool.
Ben Franklin was the man, I mean, he was a little weird, but he was the man.
That would have been neat.
I think Ben Franklin and myself could have been cool friends because, I am the man too. So, it works itself out.
You were the man.
Yeah.
And Brother Henry, you are correct. Here in the state of Georgia, if you pay 21 times your annual dues, you become a perpetual member.
That is correct.
I'm not sure what it is for other jurisdictions, but here in the state of Georgia, for a regular Blue Lodge and the Grand Lodge of Georgia, that's what it is.
So for Worship Brother Coffee, who's over in the Augusta area, you need to read Voltaire's Candide. It is a great book. It's definitely it's a good read for someone who likes enlightenment and things like that.
Well, to give you a little vocal break, you don't need it, but we're going to give you one anyway.
Thank you.
So, just to run down a quick list of 14 American presidents that have been Masons.
So you looked that up?
Of course. Do you think I memorized all this stuff? I told you I'm not a history guy.
Yeah.
So these are in no particular order, but we were talking about Washington. We got Andrew Johnson, Andrew Jackson, James Garfield, and if you want to interject on any of these, feel free. James Polk, and we know you will.
No, I'm good.
Harry Truman, Teddy Roosevelt,
the man,
Franklin Roosevelt, James Monroe, William McKinney, Warren Harding, William Taft, James Buchanan, and Gerald Ford.
And Gerald Ford was a huge Demolay member. he was a good guy, but he was very quiet about his masonry in Michigan. So, there's not a whole lot of Masonic history with these presidents except for Andrew Jackson. He went on to become Grand Master, and so did Harry Truman.
Right.
So, with the other guys, I mean, they did their masonry. I mean, there's some cool stuff to learn. Harding's got a good story. Garfield's got a decent story. Teddy Roosevelt was almost 300-pound man. People don't realize that he was a big dude. 300 pounds, I'm thinking, yeah, that's my size. That's a good dude. So,
the next one we have on the list, I'm going to ask a question and see who can get this. I'm sure someone in our audience can get this. Because I'm just going to ask it, who is the man of 1,000 voices?
And we're not going to speak until we see a good answer.
No. We'll skip on to the next one. We'll come back to that one. So, I know that the next one on our list is someone that you really admired and you enjoyed seeing.
Good job, Brother Stone.
Brother Stone, Mel Blanc. So we'll back up to him while we're here. Mel Blanc was a member of Midday Lodge in Portland, Oregon.
Did you know that Mel Blanc did not do the voice of Elmer Fudd?
So he could have had 1,001.
But he did not do the voice of Elmer Fudd.
But did you know he was a member of DeMolay for 70 years?
I did know that.
70 years.
But he didn't do the voice of Elmer Fudd.
Can you do the voice of Elmer Fudd?
Why, no, but that didn't matter. He was already a man of 1,000 voices.
But that would have been 1,001.
True statement.
So, like I said, the next person on our list was someone that you enjoyed. You saw some of his stuff when you were up taking your tour. So, the man who could escape almost anything, Harry Houdini.
Mm-hmm.
I know you want to talk about him.
See, Harry Houdini and there were a lot of Broadway performers up there they have their own lodge that is in New York City. And for those that don't know, in New York City, all lodges in New York City have to meet in the Grand Lodge building. Because the population is so dense. But there's a lot of lodges that meet there, and Right Works Brother Mo Gomez and I, we took a tour of that building, but it was one lodge in particular was where all the entertainers went. Mm-hmm. Harry Houdini was a member there. He was initiated in St. Cecile Lodge, number 568, New York City, in 1923.
Hmm.
But he was also a member of the Scottish Rite, and he was a member of Shrine. He didn't go in the Shrine until later in his life, but he was a pretty active Scottish Rite Mason in the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. This lodge is beautiful when you walk in it, and you had Cecil DeMille, and you had Count Basie, and some of these cool artists of the 1920s and 30s. They all belong to this. W.C. Fields was also a famous Mason. But the list is just rolling in when we're talking about some modern musical Masons. We do know that little Jimmy Dickens was a Mason. He's from Commerce, Georgia. We know that we know that you had Mel Tillis. Mel Tillis was a huge Mason. Ernest Borgnine at that time. Of course, we know that John Wayne, and we know all the famous ones that we would see traditionally every day, and that's where we didn't want to go with this episode.
Right.
Was to talk about the ones that we have heard all throughout our Masonic life.
Buzz Aldrin.
Yes.
Then there's all kinds. Cecil DeMille.
I don't know if many of you went to Atlanta Masonic Center when the Lunar Bible was on display there. It was donated by Brother Edgar Mitchell. He was he took the Lunar Bible with him to space. Yep. And then of course, Most Worshipful Brother Walford went to Grand Lodge in New York and displayed his Bible and on the holy altar during the entire session. I had some life-changing experiences when I went there to the Grand Lodge of New York and to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. There were unbelievable historical events. We wanted to get out to Paul Revere's lodge so that I could go up to, going over to Boston or on into Philadelphia deeper and see from Paul Revere's lodge the jewels, which are sterling silver, solid silver.
Wow.
So,
well, that's someone we hadn't mentioned was Paul Revere, John Hancock, Lafayette, John Lafayette. There's just so many what we term famous Masons in history and currently that this could have easily covered 6 hours.
But and then one that comes to mind for me is Rudyard Kipling.
Mm-hmm.
He's the author of the Jungle Book. He was only 19 years old, 18, 19 years old when he came in the lodge. Even in that day, it was still 21 to get in. And somehow he was so smart, and they wanted him to be. He was the secretary of his lodge in his 20s.
Wow.
And then you got Robert Burns, and you got so many cool guys.
Well, Arnold Palmer.
Yes, Arnold Palmer.
Cy Young.
Cy Young was a tough guy. Grover Alexander Cleveland was another famous baseball player. Honus Wagner was a Mason. These guys are in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
Then you have Ty Cobb from Royston, Georgia. He was a roughhouse. But, you look at a lot of these guys in their history and read their bios, and you're thinking, boy, I don't know if they get in today's times. But
Harpo Marx.
Yes, Harpo Marx. Harpo Marx, for those that don't know, during the Marx Brothers show, Harpo Marx wore his Masonic lapel pin on his jacket.
Well, and then talking about something of that nature, Red Skelton, his Pledge of Allegiance thing, if you watch some of his stuff on YouTube that you can find, you can see, if you watch close enough, some things that tied him Masonic.
Well, in Red Skelton's case, Red Skelton had his own TV show, and Red Skelton has Masonic symbols in that show when you watch it, especially when he goes talking about a little bitty dog.
Yep.
My daddy used to do that to me all the time and talk about, before I became a Mason, he'd talk about Red Skelton and that little bitty dog being cut in half. Well, I didn't know what that meant until I became a Mason. And you're right, The Man Who Would Be King is a very strong Masonic theme, writing from Kipling.
I was watching a movie the other day, and I remember what, I can't remember what name it is off the top of me, but I saw it again the other night on TV, and I'll remember it here in a little bit. But when they walk into a certain room, there's square compasses all over the walls.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't notice them the first time I watched it before I became a Mason.
It wasn't a National Treasures trilogy.
No, it wasn't National Treasure. And I'll have to look it up because I can't remember. Here's one that a lot of people might not think. Dennis the Menace was a Mason.
Yeah.
Not actually Dennis the Menace, but the creator, Jane North, was actually a Mason as well. So it's just kind of cool to reach back and see who some of these folks are. We know a lot of the current ones. We know that Shaq was made a Mason.
Yeah, Shaquille O'Neal was a Prince Hall Mason. Thurgood Marshall, he sat on the Supreme Court. He was also a Prince Hall Mason. We're not going to leave those greats out as well just because they're Prince Hall affiliated Masons. We got to remember Davy Crockett. We got to remember all those guys down at the Alamo that happened back then. But we need to remember some of the modern guys too. You got David Reagan, who's a NASCAR driver. You got Brad Paisley, who is a country singer.
Yep.
Him and his wife Kimberly are great philanthropists there in the Nashville area. There's just so many. The list goes on and on. And then of course you got the greats. The greats. You got the Washingtons, the Franklins, the John Hancocks. All these people that changed American history. All the guys that went into during the Boston Tea Party. Roy Jeffries, you are definitely infamous, not famous, and I promise you. Just like some of the other cats that are on this thing tonight.
Well, the movie that I was thinking about was, and it wasn't a great movie, but I enjoyed it, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Oh yeah, with Sean Connery.
Yeah, when they walk into that room to first meet each
Yes.
other, the big doors they go through, all over the walls and the doors are squares and compasses, and it really kind of struck a chord the second time I watched it to go, I didn't notice those the first time.
So the point of tonight is this: if you'll take and use the internet and use the World Wide Web, as some of us like to call it, or the interweb.
Interwebs.
Some of us, if you'll go out and search out just famous Masons, look at Wilkie, look at, what do we have as links? UniversalFreemasonry.org is a good site that we like to look at. Check out some of these other podcasts that are going on. The Winding Stairs is a good one. Will and I were watching it the other night. Louis Armstrong, you're right, Brother Coffee. It is a good one. So is John Philip Sousa, Francis Scott Key.
Well, I mean, the list is just never ending when you look back through current and past history. It's amazing the men that were and are Masons, and we are their brethren. I mean, that's what it boils down to. When you funnel it all down, there are brothers. You think about that. You're George Washington's brother.
Correct.
That's amazing. So tonight, as we wrap this up, of course, we have our quotes.
Right, and then there's a couple of things I want to say at the end in reference to reminders for the brethren.
Okay.
As we go through this month of May. The month of May, I have found that the month of May has started out harder for me, and I miss Lodge more in the month of May because the weather's getting nice.
Yep.
You got barbecues going on. You got, for Shriners, it's the up in North Georgia. Then we got the Shrine Circus that was supposed to kick off in a couple weeks. All those things are on hold, and we're all getting antsy, and we're all homebound. Basically we're out and about doing things, but we're also need to continue to follow the rules and things like that. And we'll talk about that before we close. But
so because these quotes are all three from one of his favorite people, I'm gonna let you do the first and last one. I'll do the one in the middle.
Okay. So Voltaire also, he didn't really write this quote, but he spoke it quite often. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
Absolutely.
So think about that as Masons, how that pertains to your life, with some of the things that we don't agree with right now. If you don't agree with a Mason, or you don't agree with what I have to say, it's okay for you not to agree with me. But at the end of the day, you must defend my right to be able to have a different opinion than you, and to say what you want to say.
And we've talked about that before.
Absolutely.
We all have differing opinions.
And that's what makes us great.
Yeah.
But what don't make us great is when you gave me an opinion and I don't agree with it, and your opinion is not coming out of my mouth. That makes it wrong, and then that creates rift, and that's not cool. So that's what we need to get back to as brothers. Right. So,
well, and Voltaire also said, judge a person by their questions, not by their answers.
That's pretty cool too.
And that shows, when you ask a question, it shows you're thinking.
Correct.
If you just spout out an answer, it's wholly your opinion. When you ask a question, you're wanting someone else's opinion, which shows you to be a larger man than yourself and wanting to hear that outside influence.
And it's there for the right reasons. You know what I'm saying? And the last quote is, all people are equal. It's not birth. It's virtue alone that makes the difference. So think about that. We're all created equal, but it's the virtue, it's your virtue that makes us different, and how you present those things. So that's our, like I said, Voltaire is one of my favorite writers, and, someone who likes to study about enlightenment and things of that nature and understand what was going on in Europe at that time. as America's just getting out, just basically the birth of America at that time. So, there was a lot of separation of church and state. We just separated here in America. We separated from England. There were all the churches in England were trying to spread out, and Protestants was coming on. The holy wars were, they were happening in Europe at that time. I mean, they wouldn't classify them as holy wars, but the Catholic Church ran everything, and then the Protestant churches started growing, and it allowed people to free think and things of that nature. So that's why Voltaire is what he is to me personally.
Right.
So
your closing thoughts that you want to share, and then we'll wrap it up and let everyone have the rest of their great evening.
Right.
It's been fantastic to spend the time and talk about some of our famous Masons in history.
There are thousands of them.
Millions.
Don't forget this. This is a pretty famous Mason right here. His name is William R. Moore. He's pretty famous because he gets to roll around with the man all the time. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, that just got to put in a joke.
And if I don't agree with your opinion,
that's okay. But anyway, there are a lot of Zoom meetings going on now with brethren. There's a lot of communication happening. I know we're all restless.
It's fantastic to see that.
But understand that the Grand Master's ruling is still in effect until May 31st. Brethren, that means no face-to-face meetings until then. And what that means is if you break that, that's just like violating the Masonic law at this point.
And we're not having a meeting, so we're not violating anything.
No, and we're not having any kind of meeting.
So no rebuttal again.
But understand if you're in that situation, and that does up and include funerals. I mean, I talked about it in the beginning when the Grand Master first put out his first ruling. I'm going to reiterate it again tonight. Hopefully, we only have 4 weeks to go. Today is the 5th. There's 26 days left in this month. Hopefully, on June 1st, we'll be able to go back to our lodges and just understand that the Grand Master is going to stand behind whatever his decision is at this point. This is what's best for all of Masonry in Georgia, and there have been so many states out there that have either followed suit or led the line when it comes to meetings.
Well, and we've said this before, and we'll reiterate it again. Our average age here in Georgia is 66 for a Master Mason. The Grand Master is doing this for the health of not only himself, but all Masons in Georgia. And, we can, if a brother wants a Masonic service, it can be put off.
Oh, absolutely.
And should be put off until such time as we can do it up properly.
Correct.
And legally.
But as of right now, we cannot do those things.
Correct.
And brethren, before, people get upset and they want to call the Grand Secretary's office, they want to call the Grand Master, call me, whatever, understand that what's being done right now is for the benefit of all of us. I know we're selfish in a way. We want to get back to Lodge. I mean, I miss Lodge. I miss being able to go to a tile meeting, and I miss being able to converse with brethren and eat Masonic beans and all those cool things. But I also want to be able to go at the meeting following and still see everybody.
Yeah.
So understand that the Grand Master's ruling is not in any way him trying to be, just put his chest out and say, "Hear me roar." He's looking out for all of our benefit.
That's going to be a tough job during this time to make those decisions.
Just put yourself in his spot and ask, what would you do if the health and concern of 32,000 people, you had that responsibility? Just think about that and take yourself and your heart out of it. You've got to be neutral. So with that said, it's not long until we can get back to Lodge. I know it's coming.
We're going to start recording some episodes. So
we're going to start recording some episodes here pretty soon, so we can already have them banked up, and we can just hit play, and you guys can watch them with it. But thank you for spending your time with us.
Thank you for being very active in the chat tonight. There was a lot of good stuff coming through over here. Thank you to our moderator,
Yes.
Tom. He does a fantastic job watching and helping keep the chat in line and keep us in line, so we help remember what's going on.
But remember some of the links. Remember some of the links that we share with you. UniversalFreemasonry.org, Go to the Grand Lodge of Kentucky, the Grand Lodge of California. You know, go to all these other Grand Lodges. Go to the Grand Lodge of Ohio and look at Freemason University, and then we can do it.
Tom says our flag's backwards.
Well, I'm sorry it's not backwards to us. But anyway, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and we'll see you again on Thursday night. We haven't decided a topic yet. It may be off the cuff on Thursday night. I think that's we do our best work when we're just sitting here talking masonry. But we will be talking masonry on Thursday night. We may hit some hard subjects. We don't know. I mean, it just depends on what comes to us between Wednesday and Thursday. And
if as someone in the community, please feel free to comment on Facebook. Send us an email at masonicfollowme@gmail.com. Put a comment on our stream, and drop some topics to us. We have a list of topics, but we also want something from the community. What do you want to hear? What do you want to see? What do you want us to dive into?
Just remember, we're in an open forum, and there's some things we can't talk about here. Now, if we were to do a closed forum with Masons only, then we could probably do that. But understand that if it got into that situation, there's no way in the world that Will and I would offer our opinion about certain topics without discussing it with the Grandmaster first.
Absolutely.
So with that said, everybody have a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you as always, and
be excellent to each other. Good night.